My name is Jackson Wells, but since childhood everyone just called me Jack. Why? Because Americans don't like long names, and my mother always said, the shorter the name, the less chance you have of screwing up in life. Judging by the fact that I wasn't in jail or married 6 times, her theory worked. I was born in a small town in Ohio, lost among endless plains and cornfields that were golden in the summer sun and covered in a rusty red blanket of fallen leaves in the fall. In this town, all the houses were the same gray color, not because some laws required it, but rather because of an unspoken tradition passed down from generation to generation. It seemed that the sky itself reflected this grayness, especially on cloudy autumn days, when the streets were empty and rare passers-by hurried home, wrapped in long coats. The lawns here were groomed with almost military precision, trimmed to the millimeter, and as soon as some unscrupulous owner neglected his lawn, it instantly became a topic for discussion at neighborhood gatherings. However, these get-togethers also happened for no reason. The neighbors knew more about each other than they should have, and discussed every little detail with genuine interest, who bought a new car, whose son went to college, and whose, on the contrary, returned home with nothing. Life here flowed smoothly, measuredly, and predictably, like a pre-written script in which no one was in a hurry to change their role. Most residents have worked in the same place for decades in a local factory or in small family businesses that have been passed down through generations. On Sundays, the streets were empty. Everyone went to the same church where the same sermons were heard, and after the service, people leisurely went home, whiling away the day with conversations and traditional Sunday lunches. When I was a child, it seemed to me that this is how the whole world works. I didn't question whether I liked this predictability because it was something natural, familiar, like the change of seasons. But now, looking back, I understand. This had its own charm, calm, stability, a cozy rhythm of life, which, despite its monotony, gave a sense of security and belonging. I grew up in a typical American family. My father is a mechanic. My mother is an accountant. My father was a man of principles. He got up at 5 in the morning, had breakfast with 2 eggs and bacon, drank a cup of black coffee, and went to the workshop. He could assemble an engine with his eyes closed, and always said that in life it is important to do your job well and not to try to be the smartest. Mother was of a softer nature, strict, but fair, adoring order and to-do lists. She was the one who taught me that chaos is not just disorder, but a state of mind. From an early age, I was the kind of kid who could make friends with anyone. Conversations were easy for me, and I quickly learned to avoid fights by turning everything into a joke. If school gave out awards for being able to get out of any situation, I would have a cupboard full of cups. I knew the right answer to the teacher so that he would stop asking me about my homework, and I knew how to convince my parents to buy me a new game, even if they swore they would never give me another dime. I was an average student, not because I was stupid, but because spending time cramming seemed boring to me. Instead, I became obsessed with dismantling old cars, playing basketball, and the art of coming up with convincing excuses for why I had forgotten my homework again. Teachers always said, "Jack, if you put your energy into the right direction, you can achieve anything." It's a pity that they never specified in what direction. By the time I was a teenager, I realized that I had a rare gift, the ability to convince people to do what I wanted. No, I wasn't a crook. I just had a talent for negotiation. For example, if my parents asked me to mow the lawn, I could so colorfully describe how grass dust was harmful to health that my father himself would go out with a lawn mower while I went to play ball with my friends. This skill was useful to me later in life when I had to negotiate with my bosses or get discounts in stores. I was never the most handsome guy in class, but I was definitely the most charming. Tall, fair-haired, with blue-gray eyes, I could be the hero of a toothpaste advertising poster if only I didn't like coffee so much. What can you do? There are no ideals. But I always had self-confidence, and this is sometimes more important than good appearance. My youth passed without serious shocks. Well, except for trying to build a soda resale business at school. It was closed down after a week, and the time I accidentally broke my parents' car while testing whether it was true that butter could be replaced with cola. It turned out no, it's impossible. It was one of those lessons that I learned once and for all. Some experiments are best left to scientists. Besides school pranks, I have always been partial to sports. Basketball became my salvation. It had everything I liked: speed, dynamics, excitement. I didn't dream of becoming a professional, but I was always happy to get out on the court and play a couple of matches with my friends. Sports not only helped me keep myself in shape, but also taught me an important thing. In any game, not only individual talent is important, but also the ability to work as a team. But despite all these exploits, I always tried to live honestly, respect my parents, and stay out of trouble. So far, it has worked for me. But as they say, life will more than once push you to the line beyond which the real test of character begins. But that's a completely different story. Before marriage, life was an endless experiment. I tried, I failed, I tried again. I had more than enough self-confidence, but not the slightest clear plan. I had no doubt that a great future awaited me. The only question was what kind. I wanted everything at once: success, recognition, freedom. But how to achieve this is a separate question. When the time came to choose a profession, I was guided by a simple principle: something universal, where you can earn money and not sit still. I ended up going to college to study business and management. This seemed like a reasonable decision because businessmen are respected, they have money, and they decide for themselves what exactly they do. True, it didn't immediately become clear to me that I would have to not only calculate profits, but also pass the most boring exams in microeconomics, understand tax legislation, and give endless presentations. My student years were crazy. I appeared in classrooms, but I liked classes outside the college walls more. Organizing parties, working part-time in a coffee shop, trying to make money by selling t-shirts with absurd slogans, I grabbed onto anything that could bring me experience and at least some money. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was living several lives at once: a student during the day, a barista at night, an aspiring businessman at night. I never sat idle because I believed that any acquaintance, any situation could one day come in handy. And of course, student life would be incomplete without sleepless nights, stupid decisions, and stories that are best not told to parents. One day, I even tried to create my first company, a mini event agency. My friends and I organized themed parties, offered room decoration services, and looked for photographers. The first few events went off without a hitch, but then it turned out that coordinating dozens of people, negotiating supplies, and not forgetting about the budget was not so easy. The project soon closed, but the experience was invaluable. I realized that I have organizational skills, but I lack patience. I was not an excellent student, but I knew how to negotiate, get out, and find loopholes. If I needed to prepare a project overnight, I found someone who could help. If there was a threat of failure in a subject, I found out how to fix everything. It wasn't laziness, more of a survival strategy. In the end, it always seemed to me that those who win in life are not those who know everything by heart, but those who know how to get out of difficult situations. By the end of my studies, I firmly realized it is important for me not just to earn money, but to enjoy the process. I was attracted by the idea of independence, the ability to control my own life. I started studying investments more, tried working in startups, and looked for ways to monetize my knowledge. It turned out that I liked marketing and sales more than I expected. I learned how to negotiate, develop promotion strategies, and understand client psychology. By the time I graduated, I had a ton of useful skills, several failed business ideas, and a firm belief: the main thing is to be flexible, and everything else will follow. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I was sure it would be exciting. Back then, I had no idea that the real tests were just ahead. And by this time, I had my first sexual experience, which, to be honest, was far from the scenes from the movies. In reality, everything went much faster than I had planned, and much less spectacularly. I'm still convinced that my then-girlfriend pretended everything was fine just out of respect. But as they say, the main thing is practice, not theory, and over time the situation has improved. Open relationship. Yes, I tried it. College was a time when everyone was experimenting. and I thought the idea of dating anyone without commitment was the perfect format. But it soon became clear that I was not very good at not being jealous and not complicating things with unnecessary thoughts. It turned out that I'm not very good at playing without emotions. There were other relationships not so fleeting. I dated one girl for almost a year, and it was a full-on, exclusive relationship. We spent a lot of time together, shared plans for the future, and even discussed what we would do after graduation. But over time, she honestly admitted that she wanted to try something new, see the world, live differently before tying herself to a serious union. I couldn't blame her. We parted peacefully, without drama or reproaches, simply realizing that our paths diverged. It was a good lesson that sometimes the right decision is not to hold on to something that inevitably changes. After graduating from college, a completely different life began, a life in which there was no longer a schedule of classes, sessions, and student parties. Now you have to earn a living and, preferably, not at a job that makes you hate every morning. At first, I grabbed every opportunity to save at least some money. I started working in the sales department of a large company. It was a typical office where everyone wore the same suits, had the same useless meetings, and drank too much coffee. My task was to sell a product that no one really needed, but the bosses demanded reports of high sales. I quickly realized that if you managed to sell someone an item that they didn't even intend to buy, then, in principle, you can already consider yourself successful. But I didn't stay there long. Working in an office felt like a slow death to me. I couldn't imagine spending my life like this, filling out spreadsheets and reporting useless accomplishments to my boss. I needed a challenge. Something that would give not only money, but also the feeling that I was doing something worthwhile. The next stage was a startup. Friends suggested an idea for a small business related to social media marketing. This was a time when companies were just beginning to realize that without the internet and advertising on it, they were losing. We promoted brands, created advertising campaigns, and tried to understand how consumer psychology works. I liked it. It was interesting to analyze what makes people buy certain things and ignore others. However, as often happens with startups, everything collapsed 2 years later. We could not withstand the competition and financial difficulties. After that, I again found myself at a crossroads. Look for a stable job or continue to try myself in something new. This time fate smiled at me, and I received the position of international project manager in a large company. The work involved frequent business trips, complex negotiations, and constant communication with people from different countries. It was exactly what I needed: a dynamic environment, the opportunity to develop, and a decent level of income. I learned to connect with a wide variety of people, solve complex problems on the fly, and enjoy work that not only gave me money, but also a sense of professional growth. Business trips are not only work, but also a series of funny situations, especially if you find yourself in an unfamiliar place among equally dazed colleagues from flights and jet lag. One of the most memorable was a training trip to San Diego, where I met a girl whom, as I later realized, I would never be able to forget. The training was designed for 5 days, and all participants decided to spend the first evening in a bar to relax and make friends. I was among those who got to the bar first, ordered a whiskey, and was already preparing for a series of boring conversations about corporate strategies when she entered the room. Her name was Savannah Blaine. This name is remembered immediately, as is her appearance: tall, slender, with luxurious copper hair gathered in a careless bun, and eyes that seemed too attentive, as if she could see something in you that you yourself had not yet guessed. She moved confidently, easily, as if the whole world had been created solely to serve as her background. "You look like you're ready to fall asleep from boredom," she said, sitting down next to me and, without invitation, taking my glass of whiskey. She took a sip and chuckled. "Not a bad choice, but you could have done better." I wanted to be indignant, but her impudent smile, which showed too much charm, confused me. Which would be the best? I asked, watching as she motioned for herself to order a cocktail, the name of which I couldn't even make out. "It all depends on the company," she replied meaningfully. Savannah was not just charismatic, she was that rare combination of intelligence, confidence, and irony that is difficult to resist. We started talking, discussing everything from the pointlessness of training to the best surf spots in San Diego. She worked in corporate investments, was used to understanding people, and seemed to instantly understand that I was not much of a rules person. When the bar closed, we were in no hurry to leave. At night, a warm wind blew on the coast, and we wandered along the beach, arguing about which of us had the more ridiculous profession. At some point, she stopped, looked at me, and said, "You know, you should take risks more often. You have the face of a person who is too used to controlling everything. So you know a lot about risks." I grinned. "I created them," she answered with a sly smile. I couldn't understand then how right she was. But our meeting did not end that night. The next day at the training, Savannah led one of the sections, which came as a complete surprise to me. I sat in the audience watching her easily hold the audience's attention, masterfully manipulating words and facts. Her confidence, ease of communication, and that same fire in her eyes that I noticed yesterday made her performance a real show. After the lecture, I approached her and remarked with a grin, "You forgot to say that you will give a lecture. Do you like surprises? Life is a series of surprises." "I hope you liked it," she replied with a wink. The remaining days of the training passed in mild tension. We increasingly found ourselves next to each other, as if we had crossed paths by chance, but we both knew that this was far from an accident. On the last night before leaving, we found ourselves on the beach again. "If you were offered to stay here forever, would you agree?" she asked, looking at the waves. "The question is not where you are, but with whom," I answered. She smiled, and at that moment it seemed to me that San Diego had never been as beautiful as it was now, when I stood here with her. As you probably already guessed, the story did not end there. After the training, we did not get lost in the whirlwind of everyday work, but on the contrary, began to look for excuses to see each other again. Meetings took place on neutral territories in other cities, at new events, and places where our work trips took us. Neither of us asked any unnecessary questions, but we both understood that these meetings were far from just friendly conversations over cocktails. Our phone conversations became longer and longer, and our correspondence became less and less formal. Sometimes she called late at night to tell me about some funny incident at work, and sometimes she simply sent a short, "I want a glass of wine and your company." Oddly enough, I never wanted to say no. Over time, it became obvious that our meetings had long ceased to be a formality. On one trip, we both realized it me by the way she looked at me at dinner, and she probably by the way I never checked my phone the entire evening. When we were left alone, there was no longer any point in pretending that everything was limited to discussing work topics. She was bright, free, and knew no boundaries or stereotypes. I'm used to control, calculation, and clear planning. And yet, next to her, I forgot what it meant to hold on to familiar patterns. Our relationship developed rapidly, but none of us tried to stop this whirlwind of events. Each new meeting brought something new, which made it impossible to think about one day just taking it and saying enough. One day, when we were sitting in a small cafe in Chicago after another conference, she suddenly looked at me and said, "You do understand that we have long crossed the line of friendship." I grinned and pretended to be surprised. "Is it true?" And I thought I just had a very persistent colleague. She laughed, but a shadow of doubt flashed in her eyes. I knew she was used to keeping her distance, and perhaps for the first time she felt like she was losing control. But the feeling was mutual. I invited her to my place, and she agreed as if the decision had been made even before my proposal. The evening city sparkled with a scattering of lights, reflected in the panoramic windows of my apartment, a spacious but cozy space where every item was in its place until tonight. Savannah looked around the room with an appraising look and ran her fingers along the spines of the books with curiosity. "It's like you're in a minimalist museum here," she grinned. "Are you one of those who thinks everything through in advance, or are you just afraid of chaos?" "Rather, I manage it," I answered, handing her a glass of wine. "And you?" She took a sip, shaking the glass slightly in her hand, and leaned her elbows on the countertop. There was something palpably electric in the air. I'm probably one of those who gives freedom to chaos. A sly smile touched her lips. The first kiss was more a test of the pen than a bold statement. Soft, filled with anticipation, it left a slight tingling sensation on the lips. There was no fanfare or flash of lightning at that moment, but something inside had changed, as if an internal compass had turned on, pointing in a new direction. Conversations vanished into thin air like forgotten drafts. The world narrowed to touches, fleeting glances, giggles when one of us said something particularly impudent. At some point, Savannah said with a serious look, "I officially confirm, compatibility has been tested." I laughed. "So, then there will be a detailed report." "Certainly. Tables, graphs, comparative analysis. You can't even imagine how much information I have in my head. I hope the rating is impressive." "Well, let's say you're already at your best, but there's always room for improvement." Her eyes flashed with a playful sparkle. This night was a tangle of impulses, sparkling chemistry, and a deep dive into the unknown. We dissolved in each other in light touches, in touches that did not require words, in revelations that were unexpectedly easy to give. There was no fuss, there was no doubt, there was only the awareness that everything was going exactly as it should. The walls of the apartment seemed to be silent witnesses to what was happening, and the city outside the window seemed to stand still in anticipation. Savannah was the embodiment of freedom and passion. Her movements radiated confidence, but there was a note of something subtler in her voice, perhaps a premonition that this night would be the starting point. We explored each other with lively curiosity, as if opening a book that we had long wanted to read, but were saving for a special moment. Dawn had just begun to break through the window. Its soft light fell on the walls, giving the room a golden hue. Savannah stretched, closing her eyes, then turned to me with a lazy smile, asking in a half-whisper, "Do you approach everything in life with such attention to detail?" I chuckled, pulling her closer. "Only to what is truly important. Some call it a coincidence, others call it a stroke of luck, but I prefer the term perfect coincidence. When I was offered a promotion and transferred to the office of our company in the city where Savannah lived, I did not think twice. On paper, it looked like a great career opportunity, a higher position, expanded responsibilities, travel in business class comfort. But to be honest, the main thing that tipped the scales was her presence there. "Well, it means the universe has finally started listening to me," Savannah grinned when I shared the news. "Rather, I just know how to make the right bets," I answered, raising my glass. "Apparently, I am your most successful investment." Her lips curved into a sly smile. The move turned out to be more of a pleasant adventure than a challenge. I was happy to choose an apartment, although the main criterion was not convenience, but how easily Savannah could leave her mark here. And judging by her ability to turn any space into a reflection of her individuality, she didn't have to wait long. The first day in the new office was spent in an atmosphere of congratulations, an endless stream of letters and meetings with future partners. But all this was just a prelude to the main event, an evening with Savannah. She decided to celebrate my move in her own way. Suffice it to say that dinner was great, but we never got around to dessert. I now associated the kitchen not with eating, but with her bare feet on the countertop and a look full of challenge. "I hope your situation management skills extend to your personal life," she muttered, stretching lazily. "Judging by the fact that none of my plans work around you, all that remains is to have fun," I grinned. We quickly came to the obvious conclusion. There is no point in performing a performance with different apartments. Life together began quickly and uncompromisingly. It was filled with passion, witty exchanges, and spontaneous moments that could not be predicted. We could argue about the choice of film, but within 5 minutes Savannah would come up with much more exciting ways to make peace. "Do you seriously want to discuss the plot at this moment?" I asked when she, lying on top of me, talked about the logic of the main character's actions. "Multitasking is the key to success," she replied, sliding her fingers over my shoulder. "You know how to combine business and pleasure, right?" What an ambiguous phrase, I thought, but remained silent. Every day with her was a new challenge, an explosion of emotions from which it was impossible to get tired. There was no routine in our home, just an endless flow of energy and desire to explore each other anew. If life really gave me a chance, I wasn't going to miss it. The proposal to make Savannah his wife was not spontaneous. Many times I caught myself thinking that she was the one, but I put off the moment as if I was waiting for the perfect moment. However, if I have learned anything from my time with her, it is that life does not tolerate delay. The decision came after one of our trips. We were sitting in a small cafe on the coast, watching the lights of fishing boats in the distance, when she said, "You do understand that we've been acting like a married couple for a long time now." I grinned. Was that a subtle hint or a direct order? She tilted her head, studying me with her gaze. More like a test of your ingenuity. The next day, I bought a ring. I wasn't going to put on a pretentious show, so I chose a moment that perfectly described us. Sunday morning, coffee, her disheveled hair, and my absolute certainty that I want to see this every morning. "Will you marry me?" I asked, handing her a ring instead of a sugar spoon. She pretended to think, twirled the box in her hands, then chuckled. Tricky move. You knew that I couldn't refuse until the first cup of coffee. Of course, after this, the next wave of events began meeting relatives. This test was in no way inferior in intensity to the proposal itself. Her father met me with the look of a man who had seen a lot and was not impressed. He silently shook my hand, looking down appraisingly, as if assessing my chances of surviving next to his daughter. Savannah's mother, on the contrary, immediately surrounded me with concern and an endless stream of questions. Her enthusiasm was so sincere that I was even taken aback. What's my favorite color? What are your plans for the next 10 years? What qualities should an ideal wife have? At what point did I realize that I loved Savannah? Out of surprise, I almost answered that it all started after our first argument about choosing a restaurant. Her brother was the only one who immediately said that he liked me, but then added, "Although, if you ever offend her, I will kill you." Great, now I feel even more relaxed, I chuckled. It was easier with Savannah's friends. They had long been accustomed to our joint antics, and only joked that, finally, we will legitimize our hooliganism. They never missed a chance to tease Savannah, telling me stories about her turbulent youth. The day I first walked into her office is one I will never forget. Savannah, not missing a moment to put on a show, introduced me theatrically. And here is the person who found a way to get along with me without losses or nervous breakdowns. The secretary looked at me appraisingly, raising her eyebrow, and said, "Well, at least he looks strong." Apparently, I passed another unspoken test. Then it was time to meet her boss, Gerald Hayward, a man with an ordinary appearance, but with charisma that could fill any room. He immediately made it clear who was the alpha in this office. His handshake was firm, his gaze piercing, and his tone too confident to be a simple friendly gesture. "Well, boy, hold on," he grinned, slapping me on the shoulder so that I almost stumbled. "I hope you have an open bar at your wedding. I'm already waiting for an invitation." I just nodded, trying to hide my internal tension. There was a hint in his voice that made the nerves tingle under my skin. Savannah rolled her eyes, clearly accustomed to his manner of communication. "Gerald, give him at least a chance to adapt. You're not at a corporate domination tournament. And by the way, I always win," he answered with a grin. The first impression of him was both impressive and slightly repulsive. He was a man with whom you could do business, but you would hardly want to leave your beautiful wife alone with him. Wedding. This day was doomed to become the event of the year in our environment, and for us, the most important moment in life. Savannah was not going to settle for a small ceremony. Her ideas for the celebration were grandiose, from a luxurious villa on the ocean to a stunning fireworks display that would light up the sky at the moment of our first kiss as a married couple. And of course, I didn't have the slightest objection. Preparing for the wedding resembled a military operation. An army of assistants, hundreds of lists, discussions until late at night. The choice of flowers, music, festive menu, everything that could drive us crazy, but for some reason we liked it. Savannah enthusiastically immersed herself in every detail, and I simply enjoyed her happy eyes, realizing that this bustle was not just the threshold of an important event, but in itself a part of our common history. The day of the ceremony arrived faster than we realized. Guests flocked to the oceanfront terrace. The sky was ablaze with sunset hues. The candles on the tables cast a soft light, creating an atmosphere of comfort and magic. The musicians played jazz, and the magic of this moment was in the air. And then she appeared. Shroud. Her dress flowed like a waterfall of light, the long train gently sliding along the path. Her hair was styled so that she resembled a film star of the last century. When she left, all the talking died down. Even Gerald Hayward, who usually never missed an opportunity to insert a caustic joke, simply remained silent, stunned by her appearance. We decided not to use standard vows, but to write our own. I remember standing in front of her, feeling my heart beating loudly. Savannah, you burst into my life like a hurricane, and since then there has not been a day of peace in it. I promise to be your companion in this crazy adventure, to protect you, support you, annoy you with my reasoning, and love you as only I can. You are my best choice, and I will do everything so that you never regret your decision. She smiled, her eyes shining. You are the only person with whom I can argue, laugh, dream, and be myself. I promise to support you when you don't ask for it, and argue with you when you don't want to. I promise to be yours with all my crazy ideas and passion for freedom. And yes, I will remind you that your logic doesn't always work. When we exchanged rings, something inside me clicked. It was not just a formality. From that day, we became a team. After the ceremony, the reception began. The guests admired, the friends rejoiced, the parents secretly wiped away their tears. And of course, Gerald could not leave everything without his signature intervention. Raising his glass, he said with a grin, I have a small wedding gift for you from the entire company. A sparkling new car rolled out onto the site, a sports convertible, black, elegant, with a beige leather interior. Shroud squealed with delight, and I wondered for a second if I had made a deal with the devil. I hope she's fast enough to keep up with your life, Gerald grinned. The honeymoon began the way a perfect honeymoon should begin, with an escape from reality. We flew to an island where everything except the ocean, hot sand, and each other seemed insignificant. The first few days passed in absolute serenity, endless breakfasts in bed, long walks along the shore, the whisper of waves rolling on the skin, and the absence of any worries. Everything was too good to think about anything else, or almost. I tried not to dwell on it, but Gerald's gift haunted me. I knew it was from the company, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this gesture was hiding something more. That evening, we were sitting on the terrace of the villa enjoying wine and the sunset when I finally decided to raise the issue. Don't you think the gift is a little too much? I asked, pretending that I was just thinking out loud. Savannah leaned back on the lounge chair, lazily twirled her glass in her hands, and raised an eyebrow. Why, too much. Nice car, stylish, fast. Isn't it a great gift? I'm not talking about the car, but about the one who gave it. I shook my glass, looking at the red wine, as if it could give me answers. Are you sure this is not his personal initiative? I don't like this guy. Savannah grinned, looking at me with slight mockery. Oh, for heaven's sake, it's not Gerald's personal gift. This is a gift from the company, a collective gesture. He just voiced it because, he loves the dramatic effect. I snorted. He achieves a great dramatic effect. Too broad gestures, too smug look. I wouldn't be surprised if he's already expecting to be the godfather of our firstborn. Savannah laughed and shook her head. Well, if you start to be jealous of him, I don't even know what to say. He's just the boss. Yes, charismatic, yes, with a bit of, let's say, specific humor, but this is just a person who knows how to make an impression. I thought for a moment, then grinned. Well, then remind me to buy him a mug with the words, Best Boss, written on it, since we are such close friends now. She leaned towards me, her lips whispered right next to my ear. Better give me one more week here, and I'll forget about all the cars in the world. I ran my fingers over her cheek, watching the reflection of the candles dance in her eyes. What if I give you my whole life? She smiled, pulled me by the hand, and the conversation about Gerald completely lost all relevance. Family life began like everyone else's, with joyful morning breakfasts, cozy evenings, and cute everyday little things that at first seemed so charming. Savannah left her magazines everywhere, and I stubbornly stacked them. She would forget to turn off the bathroom light, and I would close the door behind her, muttering something under my breath about utility bills. Everything was cute, predictable, and, as it seemed to me, completely normal. But over time, household little things began to accumulate like a snowball. For example, the question of who will take out the trash suddenly turned into a strategic confrontation. You promised to take it out in the morning. Savannah stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. Yes, but I thought that morning extended until sunset. I tried to get out. This is called postponing until the last minute. Would you do your job like that? Ideally, yes, but for some reason they pay money for it. But here there are only accusations. Savannah chuckled, but in the end, I still had to take out the trash. Work took a lot of time. Endless meetings, urgent projects, business trips. We were both busy, but didn't think much of it. Savannah also disappeared at the office, and when she came home, she looked as if she had just ruined negotiations at the level of international politics. "You have no idea," she said, taking off her shoes right at the entrance. This day was hell. I had to explain to Greg 3 times that the marketing strategy is not based on, "let's try something fun." "It's surprising that it's still working," I answered, looking into the refrigerator. "Well, shall we order food or try to cast magic on the stove? I would prefer that a restaurant chef perform the magic." Savannah plopped down on the sofa and looked at me with that sly smile that meant that I was cooking today. In addition to the kitchen and garbage, battles flared up in our house over much more serious issues. For example, Savannah firmly believed that towels should be folded in rolls rather than in piles. She constantly rearranged them in the closet, and every time I looked inside, I felt like a tourist who had accidentally ended up in a 5-star hotel. "It's just towels," I tried to defend common sense. "This is aesthetics." She was indignant. "You don't want to live in chaos, do you?" "I don't want to live in a textile store. These are different things." But of course, after a week, I started rolling towels myself. Apparently, this was my first lost family battle. Business trips have become a part of our life. Sometimes it was me, sometimes it was Savannah, but we both understood that work was a huge part of our reality. However, every time one of us left, leaving the other alone, the return became a small holiday. "You're home," Savannah said, greeting me at the door with a tired smile. "I'm home," I confirmed, hugging her, and the world fell into place again. Yes, family life was far from the ideal of romantic films, but perhaps it was in these little things in the battles over the trash can, towels, and choice of dinner that its real value lay. Children were not part of our plans. Savannah and I were sure that before thinking about a family, we needed to create a solid financial foundation so that in the future our possible heirs would not need anything. We wanted to be those parents who can provide their children with the best education, a carefree childhood, and a confident start to adulthood. That's why we built our careers with tenacity bordering on obsession. Working weeks with 60-hour shifts, endless projects, business meetings, trips. We were at the peak of productivity, enjoying independence, and the fact that we could manage our time without looking at the needs of others. We imagined life with children as an endless series of sleepless nights, spilled milk, screaming, dirty diapers, and a chaos of children's toys scattered throughout the house. This picture, albeit slightly exaggerated, seemed to us something distant, almost unreal, something that could be postponed until later when the right moment appeared. But as you know, life is the best screenwriter and master of unexpected turns. She never asks if we are ready, does not check our plans, but simply places her pieces on the board. And one day, in a series of familiar workdays, in the bustle of meetings and plans, we were faced with news that turned our measured, clearly structured life upside down. When we found out we were expecting twins, Our first reaction was a mixture of panic and delight. Savannah, in her usual manner, immediately began planning a list of doctors, finances, educational methods. I spent a week trying to understand that from two people we suddenly turn into four. Of course, parenthood turned out to be not as glamorous as it is shown in the films. For the first months, we lived in zombie survival mode, learning to differentiate crying into categories: hunger, fatigue, just checking to see if we were still there. If they scream at the same time, do we share responsibilities? I asked one day, looking at Savannah, who managed to rock one child to sleep while checking work emails on her phone. No, if they scream at the same time, you pretend not to hear until I call you, she snorted. Our life has turned into a series of rituals replacing each other. Children woke up on a schedule that changed every day, and any disruption to these chaotic schedules turned into a mini-apocalypse. We have become professionals in the art of falling asleep in 30 seconds and waking up at the first sound. Coffee became not just a drink, but a salvation, and we learned to drink it almost on the go. But despite all the difficulties, the twins brought us incredible happiness. We learned to negotiate, plan, and make the most of every free minute. And most importantly, we realized that with the support of friends and family, we can cope with anything. Savannah continued her rapid ascent up the career ladder as if her success was predetermined by fate itself. Promotion after promotion, bonus after bonus, her professional growth seemed unstoppable. Colleagues respected her for her determination, her superiors saw her as a valuable talent, and her competitors seemed to be watching her successes with envy. She moved forward with such speed that I sometimes joked that I wasn't even sure what exactly she did for work. "Are you sure you're not a secret agent?" I asked when she, tiredly kicking off her shoes at the threshold, talked about new projects, business trips, and meetings with influential people. But the most amazing thing is how she managed to combine everything at once: work, children, social life. It seemed that she had not 24 hours in a day, but all 48. She got up early to prepare breakfast for the children, take them to school, and then with cold efficiency switched to work, plunging into the flow of tasks, negotiations, and strategic decisions. In the evening, when most people collapse from fatigue, she managed to arrange a family dinner, help with homework, talk with friends, organize a charity event, and somehow miraculously find time for herself. Her energy seemed inexhaustible. It was as if she lived according to some kind of her own law of time, where every minute was used with maximum efficiency. Sometimes I looked at her with admiration, sometimes with slight bewilderment, trying to understand how it was even possible to juggle so many roles and not drop a single one. I didn't lag behind either. I invested in my work, built a career, and brought a significant share of finances into the family. My daily routine was planned down to the minute. Early morning meetings, endless reports, strategy meetings, urgent calls, and deadlines that seemed to creep up faster than I could blink. I got used to the rhythm of constant busyness, to coffee replacing full meals, and to checking emails in the evening, even when it seemed that the workday was long over. But our lives weren't just about offices and spreadsheets. In the evenings, Savannah and I turned into parents. We read fairy tales to the children, calmed their whims, checked their homework, and put them to bed. Our house lived its own special rhythm. In the morning, there was bustle before school. In the afternoon, there was a business race. In the evening, there were quiet family moments filled with laughter, fatigue, and sometimes even disorder, which we no longer perceived as chaos, but rather as a sign that life was in full swing in the house. Sometimes it seemed that our reality was divided into strict, almost mathematically verified blocks: work, family, sleep if we were lucky. There weren't enough hours in the day, but it was the rhythm we chose. At some point, we realized that we were ready for more. Long years of dedication, hard work, and constant movement forward brought us to the very point where a new chapter of our lives began. We bought a house. It was not just a house, it was a place that we dreamed of, but perhaps we were afraid to say our dream out loud for fear of frightening it away. Spacious, bright, surrounded by lush greenery of the garden, where apple trees bloomed in spring and golden leaves rustled softly in autumn. On the wide terrace that runs around the house, One could watch the sunrise with a cup of hot coffee, wrapped in a blanket and breathing in the fresh morning air. In the evenings, we sat there together, watching the soft sunset color the sky in shades of pink and orange, and somewhere in the distance we could hear the rare sounds of night birds. The living room, with tall panoramic windows, was flooded with soft morning light that fell in golden stripes across the wooden floor and filled the house with a sense of peace. There was a special atmosphere here, cozy chaos and family warmth. Large sofas that were invariably littered with children's toys and scattered books, a massive bookcase against the wall full of our favorite stories, and a fireplace in which logs crackled comfortably on winter evenings. The kitchen has become the heart of the home. Spacious, with white marble countertops, copper fittings, and a huge wooden table where our breakfasts, spontaneous family gatherings, conversations about everything and nothing took place. The aromas of freshly brewed coffee, warm bread, and something homemade were always in the air here, even if we rarely found time for culinary experiments. The bedrooms were located on the second floor. Our room had a wide bed, into which children invariably jumped in the mornings, bringing with them warm blankets, favorite soft toys, and endless chatter. Their own rooms were a real world of children's fantasies. Stuffed animals lived here, entire cities were built from cubes, and drawings full of magical creatures and bold ideas hung on the walls. The basement, which I had planned to turn into my office, quickly came under the twins' guns. They declared it their fortress, a place for secret games and research. As a result, my strict desktop with a laptop and the chaos of children's toys, painted boxes, and homemade huts coexisted there. This house contained everything. Us, children, our dreams, work, books, rare moments of silence, and even rarer evenings spent with just the two of us. It became not just a place where we lived, but a space where everything breathed coziness and warmth, where the walls kept laughter, where every morning began with the light rustle of steps on the wooden floor, and every evening ended with quiet conversations in the twilight. I officially declare that I can finally leave socks in any room, and we will still have space, I said, walking around the new house. If you leave socks, the kids will think it's a new game and start building forts out of them, Savannah answered, arranging books on the shelves. The house quickly filled with life. Our twins, Leo and Olivia, turned it into a real living mechanism, where everything was in constant motion. Leo is restless, with endless energy and the ability to find adventure in any corner. Olivia is his complete opposite, sensible, thoughtful, but no less cunning, especially when it comes to using her charm to get her brother to do her job. Every morning began with their voices coming from different parts of the house. Leo, stop climbing on the kitchen table, Olivia screamed. Stop lying, he retorted, clutching the stolen cookie in his hands. Toys scattered throughout the living room have become a natural part of the interior. Both twins were remarkably similar to Savannah. The same expressive eyes, confident posture, and even the manner of raising an eyebrow when they clearly disagreed with my opinion. But despite the external similarity with their mother, they were emotionally attached to me. Leo copied my gestures, tried to repeat my phrases, and proudly declared that when he grew up, he would become just like Dad. Olivia always sought my gaze in any incomprehensible situation, expecting support and advice. I doted on them. I tried to spend every free minute with them, be it crazy races on bicycles around the yard, building forts out of pillows, or evening stories before bed. We continued to build our careers, develop, plan for the future. But now our world revolved around these two little hurricanes that filled the house with new meaning every day. Now we live surrounded by joy, plans, ambitions, and constant movement forward. Sometimes it seemed to me that Savannah was jealous of the children towards me. She didn't say it out loud, but I noticed how she sometimes looked at us. These were fleeting glances, barely noticeable pauses in the conversation, but I caught them. Gerald Hayward was still present in our lives, and what is most unpleasant, he did it as if by chance. His name came up in conversations, he sent congratulatory messages on holidays, he offered Savannah promising projects in which he allegedly saw her unique leadership qualities. It seemed like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I began to notice that Gerald was not just Savannah's colleague and boss, but something more, a constant background to her life, in which I could not help but see alarming details. He didn't just send holiday greetings, but did it at 2 in the morning, allegedly because he just returned from negotiations in Tokyo. He didn't just show up at company events, but always found a way to be close to us, discreetly patting me on the shoulder while he told Savannah about incredible career opportunities. I saw how important her work was to Savannah, how she was passionate about what she did, how she achieved new heights. She was moving towards her goal, and I didn't want to put obstacles in her way. I understood that if I started this conversation, she would only laugh and say that this was nonsense, that Gerald was simply a respected person who supported her professional growth. However, I couldn't help but notice his special attitude. When we met at corporate events, he always found an opportunity to tell me something with subtext. Well, what is it like to be the husband of the most ambitious woman in the company? Are you holding on? He grinned, shaking my hand a little longer than necessary. I'm holding up great, thank you, I answered with a constant smile, but inside I was seething. Savannah, of course, did not attach any importance to these moments, although I was sure that somewhere deep inside she still understood what I was silent about. Sometimes I wanted to ask her a direct question. You really don't see what he's doing. But I restrained myself. I knew that her career meant too much to her, and Gerald, whether I liked it or not, remained a part of that journey. 20 years. 2 decades of marriage, hundreds of days filled with happiness, routine, petty quarrels, reconciliations, and confidence that my life turned out exactly as it should have. I believed that Savannah was my destiny, that we had gone through all the trials and only became stronger. I was proud that we weathered the storms together, found a way out of any difficult situations, and maintained our love. Our years were filled with common dreams, plans, trips, long conversations in the evenings, laughter, cozy family dinners, and familiar rituals that seemed unchanged. It seemed to me that I knew this woman as well as myself. But in an instant, everything collapsed, leaving me among the wreckage of my own naivety. That evening, a corporate party was held in our honor. Loud, lush, filled with a solemn atmosphere. Dozens of glasses soared upward as a sign of congratulations. Golden champagne bubbled playfully in the glasses. Waiters silently glided around the hall, serving expensive snacks. It was Savannah's evening of triumph, the most important promotion of her career, a reward for years of hard work. She was radiant in her elegant dress, and at that moment it seemed to me that all the light in the room was focused only on her. Deep dark blue silk hugged her chiseled figure, emphasizing the smooth curves of her body. Open shoulders, a thin gold chain, thin wrists framed with elegant bracelets. Her hair, styled in an impeccable hairstyle, flowed softly down her back, shimmering in the light of the chandeliers. The makeup was restrained, but her natural confidence was visible in its slightly emphasized eyes, lips with a slight shade of red, an alluring shine on the cheekbones. But it wasn't the dress that made her so attractive, it was herself. Her every gesture was precise and graceful, as if she was moving to the rhythm of an invisible melody. She didn't just walk, she glided, leaving behind her the aroma of expensive perfume, light but enveloping. There was something bewitching in every glance of hers, a mixture of intelligence, strength, femininity. She laughed, throwing her head back slightly. Her voice sounded melodious, forcing those around her to hang on every word. Men looked at her with admiration, women with respect, and sometimes with envy. I looked at her and felt pride bursting through my chest. This is my wife. My beautiful, smart, talented woman who achieved everything herself, did not break, did not turn away from the path. That evening she was a queen, brilliant, undeniable, inimitable. And I, as her husband, was the one who could call this goddess mine. But even through this delight, a strange, almost imperceptible feeling of uneasiness broke through. Gerald's gaze was too intent. His colleagues' smiles were too smug. It was as if someone here knew something that I didn't. Colleagues shook her hand. Men smiled a little longer than they should have. Women looked with respect and sometimes with envy. The large hall was filled with noisy conversations, loud laughter, and camera flashes. I stood next to her, smiled, supported her, drank champagne, rejoicing for my wife, but somewhere inside a strange, sticky feeling of anxiety arose. It rose from the depths of the subconscious, clung to subtle details, Gerald's too close attention, his gaze that lingered too long on Savannah, the barely noticeable grins of some employees whose interest in me seemed somehow insincere. Their eyes said something that I did not understand, but felt on my skin. I suddenly felt like I needed to get out. Everything inside was compressed, as if the air around had become too thick, too heavy. A breath of fresh air, a short break. I needed to take a breath, to understand the chaos of my thoughts a little. Something was wrong. A vague but persistent feeling of anxiety slid down my spine, coiling around my heart like a cold snake. I didn't yet know what exactly was wrong, but my inner voice was already screaming at me about it. Loud, demanding. I stepped towards the toilet, hoping to come to my senses. Water on your face, a few deep breaths. This should have been enough to collect your thoughts. But fate decided to finish me off completely. As soon as I went inside, I heard them. Vote. Voices I should have heard a long time ago. He doesn't even know, poor fool, came a mocking laugh. There was so much disdain in Gerald's friend's voice that something inside me snapped. So many years, and he is still sure that his family is ideal. You bet, Gerald chuckled, drawlingly, lazily, as if the conversation didn't matter. Savannah has always been a smart woman. She understood that good decisions require sacrifice. I froze. My wife's name, uttered in his voice, echoed throughout the space, painfully hitting my ears. Her career, her status. All this became possible only because she knew who to be with and when. Well, was it worth it? His friend laughed. Believe me, it was worth every cent. Gerald's voice was smug and lazy. He didn't even hide his pleasure. Her ambition made her the ideal lover. All it took was a little push, a little direction, and she was ready for anything. I closed my eyes, not breathing, not moving. Even for a family, he added after a pause. What do you mean? Oh yes, Gerald chuckled. Her children are my children. At that moment, the world cracked. No, it exploded, shattered into fragments, and fell on me like 1,000 razor blades. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my head began to buzz. Nonsense, muttered his friend. Not at all. Gerald laughed. Do you think I just invested money in it? Savannah always had a choice, but she always chose a career. And when I offered her real success, she chose me. I felt my nails digging into my palms. The pain helped me not to break down. Savannah told you that he's leaving for 3 days. His friend clarified with a grin. Of course, Gerald nodded contentedly. This idiot is always happy to help his wife build a career, and she and I always found something to do in his absence. Pause. They were enjoying the moment. They even managed to plan the children for one of these departures. Laughter. Loud, arrogant, drawn out. I stood in the darkness of the corridor, feeling rage boiling inside. It was not just anger, it was cold, sharp, icy rage that penetrated the bones and poisoned the blood. I saw how everything was collapsing before my eyes. I stood in the middle of a hall filled with guests and felt like the stupidest person in the world. Everyone looked at me, but no one saw that I was already broken. Multicolored flashes swam in my eyes, voices merged into a roar, but through this noise I could still hear her laughter. Savannah stood in the center, beaming like a queen, surrounded by congratulations and glasses of champagne. She looked like she had just conquered the world. I wanted to rush to her. I wanted to grab her shoulders and scream, "How could you?" But instead I froze, unable to take a single step. Was it fear? Or the realization that I lost 20 years ago when I decided to trust her unconditionally? Gerald appeared next to her, leaned towards her ear, whispered something, and she laughed. I turned around and walked towards the exit. I needed to get out of here, figure out what to do next. I have never been a vindictive person, especially when it comes to physical violence. But I couldn't leave everything as it was either. I was torn from the inside with rage and humiliation. I felt the anger melt me into something new, cold, calculating. I didn't need screams. I didn't need scenes. I needed proof. I needed to rub Savannah's nose into the dirt she had created, to force her to see the truth that she had hidden from me for 20 years. The first thing I did was order cameras from Amazon. Small, almost invisible, with the possibility of remote access. I installed them in the house, in the office, in places where I suspected her business life might take place. I didn't know how far the betrayal went, but I was sure that even the slightest evidence would be enough for me to destroy her constructed lie. Then I sent DNA samples, mine and our children's. I did this through an anonymous service without unnecessary questions or conversations. There was some kind of painful, burning premonition living inside me, but I still clung to the chance that at least in this I was wrong, that at least the children are mine, that not everything that I have been building for 20 years will turn out to be built on a lie. Waiting for results was the worst torture of my life. I lived like I was on a powder keg, but the worst thing was the evening before my business trip. I sat at the table opposite her, watching her eat, how she nodded in response to my words, how she smiled carefree. I knew that she had been lying to me for 20 years, but I needed to see, would there be even a shadow of doubt on her face, any hint of conscience? You know, sometimes it seems to me that you and I are one of those rare couples who really found each other, I said, looking expectantly into her eyes. Savannah grinned and covered my hand with hers. Of course, dear. We've been through so much, and look where we are now. Isn't this ideal? Yes, perfect. I squeezed her fingers, trying to keep myself from squeezing them too tightly. Tell me, have you ever thought about how your life would have turned out if everything had gone differently? What are you talking about? She looked at me with slight bewilderment. I shrugged. Well, for example, if you had chosen a different career, or another person, do you think you would be as happy? For a split second, something flashed in her eyes. Shadow, hesitation, or did I just want to see it? Nonsense, she laughed lightly, but her hand trembled slightly. You know, I never doubted that I did everything right. I nodded without looking away. My heart was pounding, but I kept a calm expression on my face. She continued her deceitful game. I lived, built, believed. The years passed like sand through my fingers, and I didn't even notice I was so sure that everything was solid, reliable, indestructible. Relationships are a temple, aren't they? It is built by two people, stone by stone, propping up the walls with trust, connecting the vaults with devotion. I remember how it all began, how stupid and naive the first promise was, I will always be with you. I didn't know then that words could be empty. Those vows can crumble like dried leaves underfoot. I didn't suspect. I didn't see any cracks in the base. I didn't notice how at some point doors began to open in my temple that I myself had not entered. I just lived. I was too busy believing that there was a person next to me who was also building and not dismantling what we were creating brick by brick. And then one day I found out. The truth did not come like thunder. She didn't scream. She is a poison that has seeped into the blood and poisoned every cell. At first, I didn't believe it. Then he looked at her face, a face that he knew, loved, cherished. And I realized, yes, all this time I was blind. I look back. 20 years. 20 steps along one road. I'm looking for the moment when everything breaks, but I can't find it. Because it has always been broken. I think about trust, how easy it is to give it and how impossible it is to return it. I think about betrayal, how it doesn't come right away, doesn't tear me apart, but seeps in over the years, rotting inside until I myself turn into ruins. I ask myself questions. When? How? Why? But the answers don't change anything. The main question is different. What now? Can I forgive? No. Can I forget? Never. But can I be whole again? Or am I no longer there? With these thoughts, I fell asleep that night. Tomorrow, I am leaving on a business trip, after which all the secrets will be revealed. I knew that when I returned, the world in which I lived for 20 years would no longer exist. This was the last evening when I could still pretend that everything was fine. Last night, I fell asleep next to the woman I loved without showing that I knew the truth. And in the morning, I packed my suitcase, kissed my wife on the cheek, heard her usual, "Don't forget to call when you get there," and walked out the door. At that moment, I realized that I would have to return to a completely different life. 3 days passed painfully slowly. I don't remember what exactly I did on the business trip. Endless meetings, dinners with partners, correspondence, everything merged into one gray lump. My thoughts were there, at home, where I left the cameras, where I left the lies that continued to live their lives, thinking that I knew nothing. And here I am again in my office. Night, silence, only the light of the laptop screen illuminates the face. There is a sealed envelope with DNA results next to my hand, but I don't dare open it yet. It's like he's radioactive. I feel his presence, but I postpone this moment. What's more important is what's right in front of me. I press play. The image is clear and high quality. Too high quality. I don't even have to strain to discern every detail. Here is Savannah standing in the bedroom, in the same dress in which I saw her on the day of departure. She's talking on the phone, laughing. Light, relaxed, absolutely free from doubt. And then he appears. Gerald. He enters like a master, confidently, without hesitation. Does he have a key to our house? This feeling of someone else's presence permeates me like an icy wave. She throws the phone on the nightstand and takes a step towards him. He touches her face. She covers his hand with hers. There is no haste in this gesture, no embarrassment. They move in time with each other, as if it were part of their usual ritual. I watch as she lets him take over her every move. The way her body responds without the slightest hint of resistance. She gives herself to him easily, without struggle, without hesitation. This is not a spontaneous act, this is their reality. I watch how she allows him to lead, to direct, as if he is the one to whom she rightfully belongs. They talk, laugh, their breath merges together. This is not just a hobby, this is a life that runs parallel to mine, existing in the dark, hidden behind the mask of family happiness. I keep watching. Until the end. Without blinking, without looking away, without allowing yourself to turn off the recording. Not allowing yourself to forget. When it's all over, I close my laptop. There is an emptiness in my chest, so deep that it seems as if they stuck a knife into me and turned it several times. I'm not angry. I don't shout. At this moment, I don't even feel hatred. There is only one thing understanding. I didn't exist. Not as a husband. Not as a person worthy of respect. It was a convenience. Background. I look at the envelope. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes. I open the envelope. Now I have everything I need. For the next 2 weeks, Jack prepared for his performance. It had to be more than just an expose, it had to be a masterpiece. Every detail was thought out to the smallest detail, as if he were planning a surgical operation. He no longer allowed himself emotions, just calculation, only precision. Invitations for their 25th anniversary were sent out in advance. Savannah, as always, was busy with work and entrusted the preparation of the evening to him. He ordered catering from the best restaurant in the city. The menu was carefully selected: expensive champagne, delicious snacks, dishes that were supposed to symbolize the level of their ideal life. Everything had to look perfect. Legal documents have been prepared. The lawyer had them ready. The projector was installed. The evidence is systematized. Each file is neatly folded into a presentation. He continued to play his role. The children arrived in advance the day before the celebration of their parents' silver wedding. He met them at the gate, watching as Leo, tall and fit, in a dark coat with a scarf casually thrown over him, got out of the taxi first, followed by Olivia in an elegant light coat, with thick dark hair tied at the back of her head. She smiled, and for a moment he saw their mother in her, the same features, the same look. But inside there was a steely grit that she inherited from him. "Dad, hi." Olivia was the first to rush to him, hugging him tightly, with sincere warmth. "Hello, princess," he kissed her temple. Leo stayed a little distant, but also smiled, shaking his hand. "How are you, father?" My son's voice was deep, without the youthful harshness, with a hint of confidence that comes with age. "Everything is fine. Are you hungry? Our dinner is ready." They went into the house. The aroma of fresh bread, herbs, and spices hung in the air. Their mother, as always, had turned the kitchen into a gastronomic paradise. Olivia immediately went to help in the kitchen, and Leo stayed with me in the living room. "You look tired," the son remarked, looking at him with an attentive gaze. "Work," I answered evasively, pouring myself a glass of wine. "And you? How are your studies?" Leo smiled and leaned back on the couch. "Not bad. We are finishing a project for the competition. If everything goes according to plan, we have a chance to receive a grant." "That's great, son." "Yes, but there is almost no time, so I literally live in the workshop." After a while, Olivia came in, dusting her hands off on a towel. "Mom says dinner is ready," she announced, sitting down next to him. "How are you? Have you already discussed all the important topics?" "Almost," I grinned. "How are you doing at your university?" She shrugged. "Sometimes it seems that I study only for the sake of a diploma, and I build all my connections outside of the lecture halls. But I like it, especially practice at the consulate." "Already chosen where to go next?" "I'm thinking about the State Department. Or perhaps the UN." I nodded, hiding my pride. They have grown up. They became independent. But will they ever understand why I act the way I do? I watched them over dinner, their little smiles, the way Leo joked with Olivia, and she teased him in return, the way their mother watched them both lovingly. The mansion was filled with guests. Expensive cars stopped at the entrance, the driver opened the door, and men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses came out, beaming with fake smiles. Conversations flowed smoothly, filled with compliments, empty promises, and carefully hidden arrogance. The house was decorated with incredible luxury. White lilies, golden candles, shimmering light from crystal chandeliers. On the center table is a huge wedding cake decorated with edible pearls. Everything hinted at a great event, at an ideal union, which everyone thought would be sealed once again with vows of love. In one of the niches of the hall, among expensive wines and champagne, stood a priest in strict black vestments. The guests whispered, some with emotion, others with slight bewilderment. Many believed that Savannah and Jack decided to renew their marriage vows, highlighting the strength of their long union. Savannah looked dazzling, as if she had stepped out of the canvas of a great artist who had captured a moment of female perfection. Her floor-length snow-white dress, woven from weightless fabric, gently flowed over her figure, emphasizing her grace and impeccable silhouette. The satin folds flowed smoothly, shimmering in the soft light of the chandeliers, and the thin lace that adorned the neckline and sleeves gave the outfit a sophisticated elegance. Her brown hair was styled in elegant, soft waves that beautifully framed her face, creating an impression of lightness and effortless luxury. Every movement of the head made the diamond earrings flash with dazzling sparks, as if tiny stars reflected all the brilliance of the evening. Savannah's eyes shone with a warm light, her smile conveyed confidence and pleasure. She gracefully glided between the guests like a seasoned actress on stage, accepting compliments with a slight nod of her head and a grateful smile. Her laughter sounded loud, but unobtrusively, like the melody of the finest crystal. Not a single hint of excitement, not the slightest shadow of doubt. Savannah controlled the situation flawlessly. She felt in her element, surrounded by admiring glances, like a queen at a magnificent ball given exclusively in her honor. The guests moved easily from one group to another, like actors changing scenery on the stage of a secular theater. Their conversations alternated with discussions of the latest high-profile deals, promising investments, new fashion trends, and of course, the constant rumors of divorces and secret affairs. Light smiles, unobtrusive laughter, cocktails in crystal glasses, all this was intertwined into a single rhythm of a social evening, filled with brilliance and hidden intentions. A delicate, complex aroma of expensive perfume hung in the air, tart oriental notes mixed with light floral shades, creating a dizzying cocktail in which shades of luck, wealth, and influence were discernible. It was punctuated by the smells of gourmet snacks, which waiters, dressed in immaculately pressed snow-white shirts, deftly served on trays of polished silver. Their movements were precise and controlled, as if part of a well-rehearsed performance, where each gesture served the overall picture of a perfect evening. Everything looked flawless, perfect, as if it had come straight out of the pages of an expensive glossy magazine. In this impeccably regulated world, Gerald also felt confident, relaxed, natural, like the host of the evening, even if the holiday was not his. He deftly maintained a conversation, switching from one topic to another, holding the attention of those around him, making them laugh and think at the same time. At one point, he gently pulled Leo and Olivia aside, offering them a little more privacy. His gaze was soft, but tenacious. His manners showed a slight ease, behind which his attention to detail was hidden. He asked them about their studies, plans for the future, making it clear that he was interested in their lives. There was no pressure in his words, only light, almost imperceptible hints. Perhaps one day there would be a place for them in the very prestigious company where their mother worked. This was not a proposal, but rather the sowing of seeds that might eventually bear fruit. Gerald spoke confidently, but without unnecessary insistence, allowing his thoughts to find the right soil on their own. Talents should stay in the family, he said with a smile, sipping champagne. Jack, watching this from the side, felt everything boiling inside. As the number of guests reached its peak, Jack stepped forward, gracefully raising his glass and tapping its rim several times with a silver spoon. The crystal ringing echoed throughout the hall, instantly attracting the attention of everyone present. The whispers and laughter died down, and dozens of eyes turned to him. Anticipation hung in the air. Savannah, shining like the star of the evening, turned to him with a dazzling smile filled with anticipation and slight excitement. Her eyes flashed with a lively sparkle, impatience flashed in them. She was sure that this moment would be the culmination of the evening, that a magnificent declaration of love would now follow, a romantic gesture worthy of their long years of marriage. Her snow-white dress shimmered in the light of crystal chandeliers. The fabric caught the reflections of light, creating an aura of perfection around her. She carried herself with the same grace and confidence, like a queen at a ball, without the slightest doubt about her power over this holiday. She knew that she was the main character of this evening. Every glance, every whisper was directed towards her, but Savannah had no idea that her triumphant role would turn out in a completely unexpected way. She anticipated the delight of the guests, the thrilling moment that was about to happen, but fate prepared a different scenario. "Dear friends," Jack's deep, confident voice rang out, instantly attracting everyone's attention. His words sounded warm, filling the spacious hall with soft, bewitching notes that made the guests freeze in anticipation. He stood next to Savannah, tall, elegant, radiating that understated charisma that always made him the center of any company. "Today is a special evening," he continued, looking around at those gathered. There was something more in his eyes than just the solemnity of the moment, but no one had noticed it yet. "Savannah and I have the honor of sharing our 25th anniversary with you." There were cheers from the crowd, and some quietly applauded. The silver trays of the waiters reflected the light of the chandeliers, and the soft clink of glasses of champagne emphasized the atmosphere of luxury and significance of the event. "A quarter of a century together," Jack continued, smiling slightly. "Years of love, devotion, trust." Savannah nodded, her eyes shining. She liked this moment, liked being the center of attention, feeling admiring glances directed towards them. "This is a priceless path that deserves an appropriate gift," he finished, and a subtle intonation appeared in his voice, which not everyone noticed. Tension hung in the hall. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Jack turned to Savannah. His gaze remained calm, but in the corners of his lips there was a mysterious half-smile, which could have sent a chill down the spine if anyone had paid attention to it. An almost palpable silence hung in the hall, anticipation filled with impatience and anticipation. With grace honed by years of social life, he handed her a small black case, covered with soft velvet, which seemed to absorb the light of crystal chandeliers. It was neat, perfectly smooth, without a single scratch, with a tiny gold clasp shimmering in the twilight of the hall. Savannah's eyes lit up with excitement as soon as her fingers touched the warm surface. She accepted the case with a light, almost flirtatious laugh, her movements graceful but impatient. Guessing was already seething inside, an expensive piece of jewelry, perhaps from the new collection that she casually mentioned a couple of weeks ago. A bracelet, earrings with diamonds, a pendant with engraved words of love. Oh, maybe it's a ring. Of course, not an engagement party, but something special, symbolic, worthy of a quarter century of their marriage. My heart beat a little faster. She loved gifts, especially spectacular ones, especially those that made guests gasp with envy and admiration. Savannah smoothly ran her finger along the velvet surface, enjoying the moment, drawing it out. Then, with a slight smile, she slowly lifted the lid. At that same moment, her face instantly changed. The anticipation gave way to confusion. The delight faded away like a candle extinguished by a sudden gust of wind. The eyebrows involuntarily frowned, the lips parted slightly, but there were no words. Inside the case, on a black velvet cushion, lay a tiny coffin perfectly chiseled, smooth, with a miniature lid polished to a mirror shine. Savannah blinked in disbelief. Is it a joke? Some unusual souvenir? Or perhaps a symbol she hasn't yet understood? But something about this object, its shape, its sinister precision, sent a chill down her spine. What is this? She whispered, her voice trembled, barely audible in the complete silence of the hall. The guests, frozen in anticipation of her reaction, looked at each other, but no one dared to speak. Jack waited a moment, enjoying every second of her confusion. He watched as her face changed, as the light in her eyes slowly faded, giving way first to bewilderment, then to growing concern. She blinked, looked at the case, then back at him, as if expecting him to laugh, to say that it was just an extravagant joke, an unusual symbol of their many years together. But Jack didn't laugh. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, almost gentle, but beneath this softness was hidden the coldness of steel, merciless and sharp. "This is a symbol, dear," he said, without looking away. "A coffin for my love for you." The words, so clear and leaving no room for doubt, pierced the space, causing it to contract like a tightened spring. For a moment, an icy silence reigned in the hall, as if someone had turned off all the sound with one movement. In that brief moment, you could hear someone's glass clinking on the table, and somewhere in the corner, a waiter held his breath, afraid to break the ominous silence. At first, someone tried to laugh awkwardly, quietly, confusedly, as if trying to diffuse the tension. But this laughter quickly faded away, drowning in a heavy, viscous silence that enveloped everyone present. The guests looked at each other. Some of the women nervously clutched their purses. Some of the men sipped champagne to hide their excitement. Their eyes darted from Savannah to Jack, looking for confirmation. What is this? Bad joke? A theatrical gesture? Or something more serious that didn't fit into the evening's script? But Jack acted quickly, leaving no one the slightest chance for guesses or reflection. Suddenly, the light in the hall darkened. It was as if an invisible hand slid across the switches, plunging the space into an atmosphere of anxious foreboding. The chandeliers flickered, dimming their glow, leaving only a soft, ghostly glow along the walls. At that moment, as the air filled with tense anticipation, a projector came to life on the huge screen behind the guests. At first, there is silence. Deep, oppressive, as if time itself was holding its breath before revealing some forbidden secret. Then subtle sounds. Rustle sounds, quiet voices, fragments of laughter, still unclear, but already alarming. The image became clearer. The guests froze, their glances, at first curious, widened in amazement a second later. A bedroom appeared on the screen. Not just a room, but a place well known to many luxurious interiors, exquisite furnishings. This was Savannah and Jack's bedroom, their marital bed. But what was unfolding there now was not a family idyll at all. In the soft twilight, among the rumpled silk sheets, two figures merged together in a forbidden, naked dance. A woman, her hair is disheveled, her lips are parted in a passionate whisper. A man whose hands confidently slid over her body, forcing her to arch towards him. Gerald. A whisper swept through the hall like a sudden gust of wind. Someone gasped, someone covered their mouth with their hand, not believing their eyes. Savannah froze, her face became a mask, pale and frozen in silent horror. and Jack continued to stand nearby, motionless, calm. His gaze remained glued to the screen. He didn't take his eyes off the projection of the betrayal that was now no longer a secret. This scene caused a real flurry of emotions. The guests gasped in horror and amazement, and someone unknowingly dropped a glass, whose fall was accompanied by a ringing sound, similar to the crunch of broken glass, echoing throughout the hall. Some faces instantly turned pale, and several people quickly turned away, unable to watch this embodiment of betrayal any longer. Others, as if spellbound, could not take their eyes off the screen, their inner world trembling with shock. Several women coughed in embarrassment, and the men nervously straightened their ties, trying to regain some of their former dignity. At that moment, the illusion of an ideal marriage, which had seemed unbreakable for centuries, collapsed with a deafening roar, tearing apart all the old dogmas. Savannah froze as if time had stopped for her. Her face turned pale to the point of transparency, her lips parted in false surprise, but no words could escape from her tormented heart. Meanwhile, Gerald, clearly stunned by the unexpected turn of events, slowly placed his glass on the nearest table. His expression, illuminated a moment ago by a confident grin, gradually turned into a mask of stony indifference, evidence that he was clearly not ready for such a turn of fate. Several of his colleagues, who had just had a pleasant conversation with him, hastily stepped aside, trying to distance themselves from the growing scandal and not be embroiled in this storm of betrayal and pain. Jack enjoyed this moment. It was like the culmination of a long, painful play in which he, unknowingly, played only a minor role. He took a step forward, feeling how the air in the room became thick, almost tangible, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome. Jack looked straight into his wife's eyes, but now he didn't see anything familiar in them. Those eyes, with which he had once fallen unconditionally in love, no longer reflected the warmth that had warmed him for many years. There was no more love in them, no sincerity, only cold calculation, which, perhaps, had always been hiding there. He just refused to see it. The video was still playing on the screen, but now the sounds seemed muffled, as if submerged underwater. Reality closed in around them, crowding out all the other guests, erasing noise, conversations, and even people's breathing. There are only them left: Jack, Savannah, and the truth that can no longer be hidden. 25 years, a quarter of a century. His voice was even, almost impassive, but in this restraint there was a sense of steel, cold and ruthless. We were building a house, family, raised children. I loved you. I supported you, protected you, and believed that we were one. He fell silent, letting the words hang in the air, falling like a heavy weight on her shoulders. No one in the hall dared to break this silence, not by clinking glasses, not by whispering, not even by moving. Everything froze. But it turns out, he continued, without looking away, I was just a convenient piece in your game. Savannah's lips twitched, but she didn't say a word. Her face, which just a moment ago had been beaming with triumph, had now turned pale, and even the slight blush that had given her the perfect picture of a confident woman had disappeared. Her fingers were still clutching the case convulsively, as if she hoped it was just a nightmare that she could slam shut and forget. Jack paused, letting the memories, lies, and unspoken excuses settle in the silence between them. You told me that our love is real. He took a step closer. His voice remained cold, but there was an exact calculation in it. He didn't scream, didn't make a scene. He was simply telling the truth, and that only made it worse. You laughed, you swore allegiance. You repeated that we are a team, that we will survive everything. Savannah swallowed, but couldn't answer. But in reality, you were with him all this time. Jack slowly nodded towards Gerald, as if finally putting an end to this many years of deception. The one who looked confident a minute ago now looked like a hunted animal. His face darkened, a shadow of panic flashed in his eyes. All this time, Jack looked straight at her, and there was no more pain or hope in his gaze, only icy determination. You chose a career, money, but you never chose honesty. At this moment, everything around seemed to cease to exist. There was no music, no lights, no guests who watched this moment with bated breath. There was only Jack, looking at the woman he once loved. And Savannah, who finally realized that this evening, which began as a triumph, would become her fall into the abyss. Jack felt like the last threads that held their lives together were breaking, and in their place there was only an emptiness, one that could no longer be filled. The guests froze, someone took out their phones, filming what was happening. Several women quickly looked away, pretending not to participate in what was happening. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously, trying to defuse the situation, but he was quickly pulled back. Savannah opened her mouth as if to say something, but Jack didn't give her the slightest chance. No need for excuses. No words needed. I've already done everything for you. His voice was smooth, cold, like a scalpel blade cutting through the last vestiges of their past. Slowly, with practiced precision, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. The paper crunched slightly in his fingers, but Jack himself remained unshakable, impassive. His gaze, heavy, without a single hint of regret, pierced her like a sentence. Divorce documents. He held out the envelope without blinking, watching as her face contorted into a convulsive sigh. At the very moment when her fingers hesitantly touched the paper, he was already turning away, as if breaking the invisible thread that still connected them. But that was just the beginning. Jack turned to face Gerald, contempt flashing in his eyes. The second envelope was already in his hand, and when he handed it over, a tense silence hung in the air. And for you, a lawsuit. On the politics of attachment. The words sounded clear, like a shot. You have used your influence for too long, manipulating women, profiting from their vulnerability, turning them into your puppets under the guise of generosity. I think your management will be delighted when they read all the charges. Gerald turned pale, his jaw clenched until the veins stood out on his cheekbones. He didn't say a word, but fear was already reflected in his eyes. He realized that he had lost. Here and now. A tense silence reigned in the room. The guests retreated as if on command, as if Gerald had become contagious, as if his mere presence could tarnish their reputation. Someone quickly turned away, pretending that he was not there. Someone looked at him with undisguised disgust, as if he were a predator caught red-handed. And finally, the third and last envelope. Jack slowly turned to Savannah. She didn't move, like a statue. "This is a DNA test," he said quietly but clearly, and his voice sounded louder than any screams. The envelope lay on the table in front of her, and at that moment her face was distorted with fear. Official confirmation that Leo and Olivia are my children. Not him. They are mine. Savannah staggered, her face contorted in shock. Gerald seemed to lose the ability to breathe for a second. One of the guests could not stand it and whistled softly. Jack took a step back and looked at the guests. He saw how many of them pretended that they didn't know him, that they didn't even understand how they ended up here. They felt uncomfortable because they had witnessed their carefully constructed lies crumble. "Let's raise our glasses. For the truth," he said, raising his glass of wine. No one dared take a sip. The divorce took place quickly and without unnecessary fuss. Michael did not want to drag out the process, did not want to sort things out. He simply signed the papers, giving Savannah the minimum: no property, no children, no chance of maintaining her old life. The legal machine worked coldly and impartially, like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting off the past. Savannah left, leaving the house in which she had lived for so many years with one suitcase. Her bank accounts were quickly emptying, without regular income, without support, without the connections she had come to rely on. She tried to get a job at another company, but her reputation was destroyed. The scandal sounded too loud in business circles, and no one wanted to get involved with a person who was stained not only with personal, but also with ethical violations. The most painful blow for her was that the children completely erased her from their lives. Leo and Olivia didn't answer the phone, didn't open the door, didn't even try to pretend that they could forgive her. She left them messages, wrote letters, but in response there was silence. One day she nevertheless met Leo on the street. He was standing with friends near a coffee shop. Seeing his mother, he froze for a second, then turned and left without even sparing her a glance. Gerald tried to stay afloat after losing his job, but his influence disappeared as soon as he lost his position. When the board of directors fired him, a series of audits followed, revealing numerous frauds. He had to leave the city, but his name has already become synonymous with corruption and manipulation. Nobody wanted to deal with him. Society, which had previously turned a blind eye to the sins of others, now condemned them with special pleasure. Savannah found herself socially isolated. The friends she used to spend time with stopped responding to her messages. Her acquaintances pretended not to notice her in public places. Jack sat in his new penthouse, looking out over the skyline of Boston at night. The city was seething with life. Neon signs reflected in the wet asphalt, cars honked, and silhouettes of hurrying passers-by flashed on the sidewalks. Here, high above the streets, he felt like a spectator and not a participant in this endless performance. He broke away from the past, but did not feel truly free. He achieved everything he wanted. Spacious home in the city center, prestigious job in consulting, complete financial independence. And yet satisfaction eluded. He achieved calm, but it was a cold, measured calm, like an empty stage after a loud performance. The price he paid for a new life was higher than he expected. Memories of the past would not let him go. It seemed that with every step forward, they grew deeper into his consciousness, reminding him of the years spent on illusions. He no longer trusted words because they could only be a beautiful facade. He learned to take people apart piece by piece. Subtle hints, glances, tension in the voice, all this told him more than confessions and promises. He tried to let someone into his life again, but even the most sincere smiles caused him doubt. Now he saw hidden motives, felt the catch in the most innocent gestures. He was not afraid of loneliness, but sometimes he found himself oppressed by the silence. Jack poured himself a glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid slowly fill the glass. In the reflection of the window, he saw the wrong person who once dreamed of a family, believed in love, and built a future. This new Jack was different. It had more power, but less warmth. He became reasonable, resilient, but at the same time lost the ability to believe unconditionally. The letters lay in an old metal mailbox that had once been bright blue, but was now peeling and tarnished by time and weather. Every time you opened its creaky door, you could smell the smell of dust and dampness mixed with the faint aroma of paper and dried ink. The stack of letters, neatly folded one on top of the other, was noticeably frayed. Some envelopes were barely held together by the glued edges, while others were torn, as if someone, in a fit of emotion, began to open them, but changed their mind. Some letters remained in sealed envelopes, awaiting their fate. Others were crumpled and covered with careless lines from repeated folding, as if someone had read them over and over again, crossing out their own words or regrets. No one had taken them for many months, maybe longer. The dusty box seemed to be hiding someone else's confession. Savannah sat in the kitchen of her tiny rented apartment, where the only source of heat was a modest radiator under the windowsill, and looked at the phone screen. A small kitchen lamp cast a dim light on the peeling walls. A dull silence enveloped the room, and this silence was almost palpable, as if the air around her was thickening, becoming denser. There were no incoming messages. The voicemail remained empty, once again confirming that she would not hear any words, friendly or hostile. Savannah seemed to have lost count of how many times she pressed the call button, how many times she listened to the short beeps on the receiver, after which the familiar cold voice of the answering machine invariably turned on. Each call broke her heart a little more, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She wrote letters every week, trying to put into them what she didn't dare say out loud. She sat down at a cheap table on which stood the remains of yesterday's tea in a peeling mug and took a pen and envelopes. The first letter always turned out short, as if it were a test letter, a couple of lines in which she tried to collect her thoughts and understand what exactly she wanted to say. Then came moments when the feelings that had accumulated over days and months burst out. These letters turned into long confessional monologues, where every word was saturated with pain and remorse. She tried to talk about everything, about her unfulfilled dreams, about their once common future, which she herself destroyed, about the ambitions that blinded her and obscured true love and devotion from her. In each letter, she admitted how cruelly she had acted and how much pain she had caused Jack. She recalled moments when she could change everything, when fate gave her a chance to stop, rethink what was happening, and choose a different path. But every time she chose the wrong turn, as if she was stubbornly walking towards a cliff, neglecting the arguments of her conscience and the trust of a loved one. She wrote about how later, already alone with herself, she realized that all this time she had been deceiving not only Jack, but also herself, hiding her guilt, covering it up with a false sense of her own achievements and an endless desire for success, which in the end turned out to be empty. Savannah asked for forgiveness in all these letters as if she were memorizing a prayer, repeating words of repentance over and over again, hoping that one day they would sound sincere and loud enough for Jack to hear them, even if he never opened the envelope. She did not expect an answer. She understood that perhaps these letters would remain unread. But she continued to write because she was convinced. Maybe at least part of her soul would find peace if she poured out her bitterness and shame in letters. Each envelope was a tiny chance for her, almost a rite of purification, even if she did not believe in real forgiveness. At times she caught herself waiting for a miracle, that one day she would find an unfamiliar number on her phone or receive a short message from Jack, full of anger or resentment, but that would be better than complete indifference. However, the phone remained stubbornly silent, the voicemail was not filled, and the days turned into weeks and turned into months. Deep down, Savannah knew that silence was the worst punishment, and that sometimes you have to pay for the actions of the past throughout your life. Meanwhile, the mailbox kept filling up and filling up. It was filled with letters written on different papers, sometimes on simple sheets torn from a notebook, sometimes on expensive embossed paper. These were those rare moments when Savannah tried to show Jack that she kept the memory of their past best days, when they gave each other beautiful cards and came up with little surprises. But even these special envelopes lost their luster, turned yellow, and became stained by time. Savannah continued to write, even when her hands trembled from the cold or internal tension, and the ink blurred from tears, leaving illegible marks on the paper. Looking at the crumpled sheets, she remembered all the mistakes she had made and felt her heart squeezing with melancholy. Sometimes she closed her eyes and imagined how she could go back in time, to that one day when they parted ways, but alas, it was impossible. There was not a drop of hope left in her soul that Jack would read these lines. She had already gotten used to the idea that there would be no answer. So the letters in the void became her quiet dialogue with herself. Each envelope turned into a last attempt to cross the gap that Savannah herself had dug between them. Each crumpled leaf became a mute witness to how deep this abyss was, and the more letters accumulated in the forgotten box, the clearer it became that some bridges had indeed been burned forever, and it was no longer possible to restore them. However, she couldn't stop. Letters became her only connection with the past, both painful and vital. Savannah seemed to hope that if she wrote continuously, living through her guilt over and over again, the pain would gradually dull and the memories would no longer burn brightly in her memory. But each new letter only returned her to the same memories, forcing her to relieve the pain of loss again and again. The dusty mailbox continued to contain this endless series of envelopes, the last reminder that there are actions from which there is no turning back, that sometimes, no matter how desperate our prayers are, the answer never comes, and that the word forgiveness can remain an empty phrase if the one to whom it is addressed no longer wants to hear it. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.